There's a new poll out that says that 90% of voters support the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. 9 out of 10 raises the question, who is the other 10%? Apparently it is someone in Congress. Bernard Whitman is the founder and CEO of Whitman Insight Strategies, and he's also a former pollster for both former President Bill Clinton and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and he joins us this morning from New York. And Mr. Whitman, thanks for being with us. I guess the biggest question is, who is against this? And how is it possible that something can poll so well and yet nothing's getting done?
Well, Del, thank you so much for having me on. This is an extraordinary bright spot. We never get the type of unanimity of opinion on any issue, anytime across this country. We're getting 9 in 10 people saying we must reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. 2/3 of people strongly support it. 2/3 of even Democrats, Republicans, and even independents support this. The answer is it's been held up by the NRA. The NRA has held this up for a number of years. It lapsed in 2018. But politicians should really take notice. People support this across the board. 91% of people say 93% of people say it is important to pass it. 93% of people want it to be a bipartisan show of support. And 4 in 5 Americans across the political spectrum say it will impact their vote. I am actually finally optimistic that we're going to get this done. We have never seen this level of support for any type of policy or legislation, even going back to things like invading Iraq after 9/11 got 76% support. Invading Kuwait to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait got 80% support. This is truly extraordinary and a very bright spot in an otherwise hyper-partisan divide.
So the NRA lobbies Congress, and Congress decides it doesn't want to do anything. Do we have names of members of Congress that are sitting on this particular piece of legislation? I always like to name names and see who we can possibly point out, because when you're talking about, 88% of the Democrats, 78% of Republicans, who is out there?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of politicians who are afraid of the NRA, and unfortunately, one of the things that got taken out of the legislation is the so-called boyfriend loophole. Those who are convicted of domestic violence, who are married spouses, can no longer possess firearms. There was a piece of part of the legislation that would extend that to unmarried partners as well. That was pulled from the legislation despite the fact that 3/4 of Americans approved that. But I think this will allow a number of individuals who may have not supported it to go ahead and support it. I don't want to name names today because I'm hopeful that we'll get 60, 70 senators actually supporting this legislation. And they well should, because their constituents are dramatically in favor of it.
You can just whisper in our ear and we won't allow the audience. I'll put my finger over the microphone and you don't have to worry about that. But why is this a reauthorization? And did the previous law sunset? And how did that happen?
Basically what happens is it passed in 1994 as a signature piece of legislation penned by then Senator, now President Joe Biden, and it was supposed to be reauthorized every 5 years. It lapsed under, surprise, the Trump administration. And what's happened is the funding has dried up, protections have lapsed, and we've seen over the years, particularly during COVID, a dramatic rise in domestic violence. Globally, the estimate is 25% increase in domestic violence in the last 2 years. So at a time where the need for protections is greater than ever, we have been hamstrung. When we look at actually the support for individual parts of this legislation, non-discrimination, housing, protection for funding for law enforcement, we see dramatic support across the board, 3/4 or more supporting each piece of this legislation. So finally, I think we're going to be able to get this done.
You know, African-American voters get frustrated. We were talking about voting rights on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday yesterday. They get frustrated because they see something that seems to be logical, that passed Congress by widespread margins, and then nothing is done. This is one of those things where you have to ask yourself, how long can Congress continue to buck this before it comes back to hurt them at the polls? As a pollster, 52% of the population are women, and they are active when it comes to issues like this. How long before this comes back to bite those politicians that do nothing in the butt?
Well, I mean, the extraordinary thing is with all the priorities that are faced by Congress and this country, individuals say that this should be one of the top priorities. 49% say it should be a top priority. 90% of people say it's important to address it. And like I said, 4 in 5 say they're going to think about their representatives' vote on this when it comes time for election. So I think finally The time is now. They can no longer ignore it. I mean, look, the situation, for example, with Ukraine and Russia is outrageous. It's horrible. It needs to be addressed. Even more people believe that addressing this issue of reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act is important, more important even than dealing with the situation in Russia and Ukraine. That's not to diminish that terrible tragedy, but it just underscores the time is now. We have not had funding for a number of years, and the protections are critical. This is common sense legislation that will help to reduce domestic violence, sexual violence, stalking, and date rape.
Bernard, if you email me the names, I promise that I won't attribute them to you. And it's just like whispering in my ear, but more electronic. Bernard Whitman is the founder and CEO of Whitman Insight Strategies. He joins us this morning from New York. Bernard, as always, thanks for being with us.